Dadcast Nation. Welcome to this episode of the Dadcast Podcast. I'm your host, Lavelle Lemonier, and I've got a treat in store for you today. We've got some esteemed panel members who are going to help us discuss American history, the American history that we've seen very recently with the indictment of former President Donald J. Trump. And so that's going to be the gist of our discussion today. As always, I invite you to leave your comments, to subscribe, like, and share, of course. We would like to spread this broadcast to as many people as possible. And so without further ado, I'm going to go through the list of our panel participants today. First of all, we have Attorney Lavelle Johnson. He is from the Travis County DRO office. He's a native of Port Arthur, Texas, and I like to say he's a good friend and brother of mine, a big brother. I've been knowing him since I was a young child and have high respect and hold him in high regard. He's an excellent, excellent person and an excellent attorney. Lavelle received his undergraduate degree from the University of Louisiana Xavier in 1988 and his law degree in 1997 from the South Texas College of Law. He's also worked for the Attorney General's office and as an attorney for the U.S. Small Business Administration, among many other notable positions. And so definitely we welcome Mr. Johnson to our panel. The next participant, you're welcome. The next participant we have is Attorney Brittany Dobbins. She is listed as one of the top 40 under 40 attorneys in the state of California. She's received her undergraduate degree in political science and sociology from DePaul University and her law degree from California Western School of Law. And she also has a very unique and special connection because she actually worked on the Trump University case. And so I'm sure that is going to give her some unique insight into this discussion. She has been an associate attorney for several other law firms and now is in solo practice in Beverly Hills, California. She's an entertainment attorney, I think, as well, which is how I came across her for some of my entertainment endeavors. The next participant that we have is Mr. J. Clinton Hill. He is also a longtime friend of mine. I've known him, I don't know how far back we go since I was a kid. Far back as I can remember almost, I've known him. He is
What to give you
definitely
over
he
50
is
years,
over 50 years exactly.
like
Um,
60.
he is with Capital Market Insights and Strategies. He received his undergraduate degree in modern economic history and English literature from Central Michigan University. And he was a part of an honors program, a graduate of an honors program at the University of Cambridge. I remember when I was young, I used to tell all my friends, I know a guy that went to Cambridge University. You can't mess with me.
Okay.
So I've been hanging my hat on that proud moment for him for many, many years. He's also served as the first vice president of investment advisor for Morgan Stanley, and he's held several other senior level positions in the finance and investment industry. And so we definitely welcome him to our panel. And last but not least, I told her I was going to say this, and she told me don't do that. But this is my boo, y'all.
Okay.
This is my wife. Dr. Gabrielle Lemonier. She is an educator and behavioral therapist who now works with children with autism. She received her undergraduate degree and 2 master's degrees and an education doctorate from our alma mater, Lamar University. Go LU. She's also served as an assistant superintendent for a large school district in Texas and many other leadership capacities within the Texas school system. And so I definitely want to welcome her to the panel and welcome each of you to our guest and audience. We are covering what I guess is one of the most monumental moments in American history. Most recently, as everyone probably knows, whether you're watching from the US or from abroad, we're in a point in our country where our former president, for the first time in American history, has been indicted on criminal charges. We're not here to say per se whether he's guilty or not. We'll allow the legal system to make that judgment. But what we are here to do is to talk about the more than 30 counts, 34 to be exact, felony counts that have been charged against Mr. Trump. He appeared in court recently to be arraigned on the charges, and he personally appeared and pled not guilty to each of the counts. We have since been made aware of the details of the indictments, the indictment details. We've been able to look at the statement of facts that go along with it. I'm sure most of us have already heard the district attorney's press conference and where he spoke about the charges that have been brought against Mr. Trump. And the same evening of his indictment, Mr. Trump went to his Mar-a-Lago property and held a press conference slash rally in which he um, gave rebuttal to the charges that have been brought against him. And he did so in Trump fashion, is how I would like to call it. Um, and so, to open up this discussion, I'm going to pose a question to the panel, and we'll take someone to respond here. After reading the 16-page indictment, that's right, 16 pages, 34 felony counts, it appears to most experts, and I've listened to experts on both sides, the left and the right, the middle, however you want to look at it, the facts in this case are not as substantial as most experts would have liked to see. Do you think this case has a chance of resulting in a conviction? And whoever would like to respond to that, please um, lift your hand and I'll let you know. I'll let you have the floor.
Well, I don't have a legal background professionally, per se, but I had a question, I guess, to maybe clarify this. And so, was it 34 felonies that he was charged with? Because it was my understanding that they were misdemeanor charges. However, there were two felony counts, against him. Is that correct? Or because if it's a
Um,
misdemeanor instead of a felony, I mean that puts it in a different context.
It does, and I'm going to let Miss Dobbins go ahead and
Okay,
respond to the question,
okay,
and then she can also respond to your question as well, I'm sure.
okay.
I guess I'll take them in order. So just I did read through the event. I also watched recent TV footage, including Trump's rally or whatever you would call it that he had in Mar-a-Lago. And I listened to the prosecutor talk about his take on the case. So with that in view and that in mind, my personal opinion on it is that the pleadings are purposely vague. And I think that that is a smart strategy, in my personal opinion, given the nature of social media and how polarizing and popular Donald Trump is. We've seen it before with the insurrection and him being able to mobilize almost intentionally, and I do use air quotes when I say that, a group of people to engage in violent activity, and I think that has to be considered. You also have to keep in mind that you don't necessarily want to give the defendant a playbook on the charges that you're going to bring against him. So I think that there is a definite hole in the pleadings in terms of what the underlying actions are against him. They're intentionally not mentioned. It's not in there at all. What he was charged with is a felony. It's falsifying business documents. The irony of that law is that it requires him to violate the same law, but the misdemeanor version first. But he has to do so in a manner that is meant to defraud or conceal another felony or another criminal activity. So that's where a lot of the confusion comes in. He was charged with a felony, which is the actual title of the is falsifying business records in the first degree. So that's the overarching charge. And then he has counts of those. So it's the same crime but different acts, and those are separated out into what they call counts. And there's 34, however many of them that there are. So he's basically charged with the exact same crime, but different acts that have violated it are set forth within the pleadings. The part that's missing is what misdemeanors he violated or what the other crimes that he was trying to conceal by falsifying those records he committed. They're not telling us what they are. The prosecutor, I did hone in on something he did say during that press conference, and it was that he wasn't required to plead that, which is probably true since it wasn't thrown out and the indictment is moving forward. But he also said, he alluded to the fact that it's going to be state and federal election law violations and other false statements that would cover up other illegal activity. So really kind of in my mind's eye, what we're looking at is we're going back in time to 2016 when he was running for office around the same time I was working on the Trump University case, and they're looking squarely at all the activities that he participated in to make himself favorable for the election. And then they're going to probably look at whether or not that violated any state or federal laws by concealing that information. And if it did, then based on what you find out as the case progresses, will be the question or not of whether it's going to be successful. I don't think we have any idea at this point. They probably do, but they will purposely not give us any inkling of whether or any information that will allow us to decide at this point if it's going to be a successful claim.
Okay, thank you for that response,
Thank
Mr.
you. Thank you.
Johnson. You have your hand up to interject.
Yes, I agree totally with Attorney Dobbins in her initial statements. I would also like to add that the additional crimes from the press conference, when I listened to DA Alvin Bragg, were also New York State tax laws as well as New York State election laws. I think that those are stronger crimes because they're directly associated with the jurisdiction of the state of New York. I believe the federal election law problems is more problematic because I don't think there's precedent for a local DA in any particular state or jurisdiction to use federal crimes as a vehicle to get to a felony. And I think that's a slippery slope. So I do believe that the underlying charges of a misdemeanor would probably be more successful if they hone in on the New York State tax law as well as New York State election law claims to get to the felonies. In addition, I happen to have been a prosecutor as well as a defense attorney. So I've worn both hats. And as a prosecutor, I agree with Ms. Dobbins. You want to give enough information so that the defendant can prepare a defense, but there's also discovery that has to take place. The Trump organization and lawyers will be privy to all of the same information that the prosecutor has now. That information will be delivered to them over time. They'll also be asking, the Trump lawyers could ask for additional information concerning witnesses' identity and that kind of thing. So there's a ton of information that was intentionally, as Attorney Dobbins said, left out of the facts and left out of the charges because that information will be delivered over between the parties. A trial is more like a dance. There really aren't any sort of gotcha moments, Perry Mason moments in a trial. Each side knows or should know the other evidence. And it's particularly incumbent upon the prosecutor, Alvin Bragg, to give over all the information because if he fails to give over all the information he has, including exculpatory information, then he runs the risk of either losing that trial or losing on appeal. So it's really important that everyone keep in mind that this is months. This is only the very beginning of a long slog, not only because of the actual legal process, but because of the defendant that we're also dealing with. So as a defense attorney, I like to say always, and I get this phrase from a more senior attorney than myself who's now retired, is that a defendant is always cloaked in innocence. When Donald Trump walked into the courtroom on Tuesday, he was innocent. And each time he walks into the courtroom from this day forward, he's innocent. So until the jury of his peers in New York delivers a guilty verdict, he's innocent as both all of us are, and we have no involvement with the case. He's only alleged. It's always alleged, and I think that you will hear through news organizations and other lawyers, they will continue to use the A word, which is alleged. From a prosecutorial side, it's very difficult for me to say whether there's enough evidence or not. I think that they would not have brought the case if they did not believe they could get a conviction, but that does not mean they're going to get a conviction because there's so many pitfalls between here and there. And the bigger thing is that I believe Donald Trump's attorneys will first try to procedurally get rid of the case. They will try to procedurally get the case thrown out of court or otherwise diminished in some capacity before we even get to trial.
I think Miss Dobbins had her hand, and then Mr. Hill. You're
Can't hear.
muted, Miss Dobbins, I
You,
believe.
Thank you. I said I did look up. I'm not sure how helpful it will be, but to add some context, the penal code that he's charged with violating, which is a Class E felony, states that when someone commits the crime of falsifying business records, which this is also sort of paraphrased in the indictment, in the second degree, and when the intent to defraud includes an intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof. So the falsifying business records in the second degree is what he also needs to have violated, and that has like a bunch of different sections underneath it of how he could have violated that. And it's like making a false statement in the entry of your business records, altering or erasing information, omitting information, or preventing the making of an accurate record. So that's the misdemeanor. uh, it's a subset or included in the felony charge. So we're not going after, and I'm speaking for as if I'm the world right now. We're not going after Donald Trump for the misdemeanor, so to speak. It's an element of the felony. So he's only being charged with felonies. And then kind of to go after, there's some key language in the statute that I kind of honed in on, and that's that he had to have the intent to commit another crime or to aid or conceal the commission thereof. So for the federal crime comment, I'm kind of circling back to that because there is no requirement, at least the way I read this statute, for them to prove that he committed a federal crime. He just has to have been trying to, or that some of the elements are there, or he had to be commissioning it, or doing something that in turn violated it. I think they're kind of going to hold on or kind of cling to that in the sense that he doesn't have to actually, they don't need to prove each element of the underlying felony. At least that's the way I read it.
Okay. Mr. Hill, you had a comment?
okay, so thank you, Ms. Dobbins. So you actually clarified the nuance between misdemeanor and felony. That's what my question was going to be. But then I just want to clarify too. Then, so uh, this, the way I understand it, so the state law doesn't prevent. So even let's say we continue, and right now they're in the discovery process, seems. But state law doesn't prevent Trump from running for re-election. Is that right? Or so? I mean, what would be the end game in pursuing this? That's a question for anyone that to take. Is
Okay.
want to answer that? Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Lemonier has her hand
Yeah.
up,
Okay. Yeah.
and
Good.
then Miss Dobbins will chime in as well. I think you're muted as well.
I had originally wanted to speak. I also did in my I don't profess to be a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but I do love the law, and I did look up the Class E felony first. But before I go there, I will respond to what the Articles of Confederation require of a president. As it relates to his ability to run for the presidency, he need only be a natural born citizen, 35 years old or older, and be have resided in the United States for 14 years. There is some research that shows that there was a person who actually tried to run for president from a jail cell. So him being indicted in no way stops his ability from running from president for the president of the United States. As a layperson, I just wanted to hone in on the fact that we are talking about indictments that have to do with hush money. And when I think about hush money, I think all the time of all the people that we've heard that have settled cases out of court for an undisclosed amount of money, or this person has been paid off from that. And I would like for the lawyers to um, give me feedback on whether my research is indeed factual. What I could find is that there is no law that says that what Trump did in the way of paying people off was illegal. The illegalities came in the timing, so that the fact that he did it in the as close as it was to his knowing that he was going to run for president is what then caused it to be a crime. So again, I'm just a layperson, and that's just what I read. And if somebody could give us some more feedback on the validity of that.
Ms. Dobbins, I think you were in
Yes.
line to speak.
Yes, I love that point. I kind of alluded to it a little bit when I was speaking before about we're going back in time to when he was running for president. I looked up actually the timeline to refresh my recollection. So Donald Trump announced that he was going to run for president in June of 2015. So when we're talking about timing and his activities that followed, he did a number of things like dismiss or settle the Trump University case. These other activities are in line with that, paying off people. And so I don't know the timing of those payments, but I do know it was Karen McDougal that he allegedly paid $150,000, and Stormy Daniels, who he allegedly paid $130,000, and then a doorman that the Inquirer paid off. And so those were all sanitation attempts so that there wouldn't be any negative media and stories around him. And so, yes, I too looked up and I was wondering what the underlying crime was, or concealment was. It definitely, that is not the focus. Him paying those people off is not the focus. That's an act that they believe is hiding probably something else that they're going to either find or know about or need additional evidence about through discovery. And I think what they're looking for is exactly what was said in the press conference. They're looking for election law violations or tax law violations. You know, looking at the type of omissions or changes that he made, they're financial based. So that kind of leads you to think, okay, well, if you lied about the amount that was paid or if it was paid at all, what's the tax implication? So there's tax potential issues, and then there's, how much are you allowed to keep from the public, or at what point are you lying to the public, which, as we know, has always been an issue with Donald Trump. The Trump University case was an issue of false advertising and lying. We have the Fox case right now with, knowing that the election wasn't, you know, in Trump's favor, and this entire kind of sort of conspiracy theory that went forward with the help of the media. And so when it comes to the truthfulness of this person, whether you like him or you don't, you have to acknowledge the fact that there are clear issues there that need to be investigated. And I think there was a question about what's the point of doing this, because it doesn't necessarily prevent him from running for president. It's there's a saying that I hear a lot of times in the area of law that I practice, which is entertainment law mostly. I do some other areas of law as well, But the court of public opinion is worse sometimes than the actual court. And so the point of doing this is you have a person who has a cult like following. You know, there are people who are not listening to reason, who are not listening to facts, who don't care how crazy it seems. They are believing in Donald Trump at all costs, and regardless of it makes any comment, there's no common reason or logic to it. They're just going to stick beside him. And you have to do something drastic to crack that. Otherwise, if he continues to, move forward and run for president and that perception stays intact, we could be facing a very dangerous reality moving forward if he were to win the presidential election again. And again, it has nothing to do with partisanship. It has nothing to do with whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. I think he has a good enough track record to prove that he doesn't have, in my personal opinion, a moral compass on what he is willing to say in order to advance his own agenda. And that is, to me, that's a very, very dangerous person. It's like I can akin that to it's Hitler-like to me, but we won't go there.
Let me interject here, and we're going to move to the next question. But I want to ask or pose the question regarding Donald Trump as an individual. And you mentioned about the Trump University case. Um, there's been some question about, well, first of all, if we go back, so one of you guys mentioned that the prosecutor has to prove intention, or has to show that there's an intent to commit another crime is involved in this case. If we look at intentions, and I'd like Dr. Lemonier to speak to this particular part, but if we look at intentions, it seems to me that Mr. Trump has had intentions in the past of misleading or steering away from facts in order to seem favorable to his base. But the other issue that I've seen is that so vacillates between the way he presents information prior to notifying the American public that he was going to run for president. Um, he made some comments that were favorable um, for minorities, and he made some comments that were unfavorable to minorities. So I'm wondering when we look at the personality, and Dr. Lemonier hopefully can speak to this behavioral piece of it, the personality of Trump, the personality of DA Alvin Braggs, because his credibility has been called into question by some Trump supporters because they believe that he has been on the prowl to get Mr. Trump, um, even through his own campaign to become district attorney there in Manhattan. So, Dr. Lamonier, how does behavior fall into this? Are we, I mean, is this a narcissist to no end? Is this a Hitler-like personality? Is the DA just hell bent on getting Trump at any cost? What are we dealing with behavior-wise?
Thank you for the question. I would first want to say that these are just my views. They in no way reflect the company for which I currently work for. And then to move on for there to say that from a behavioral lens, we do not characterize people by titles. We look more at those behaviors that would then make up what other social sciences look at as or may view as a narcissistic personality. However, the fact that I also hold a master's degree in counseling, I have the privilege, I guess it is, to speak from both lenses. With that being said, you started out by saying that you believe that the Trump press conference was presented in true Trump fashion. And there was my initial point to disagree. I felt like in watching Trump, that was the first time that I saw any reverence to or deference to law and some minor degree of humility, even in that particular case. During that press conference, I also though saw his ability to gaslight, his ability to demonstrate behaviors that, again, that are consistent what we view as being narcissistic. He manipulates, and there's no stretch of the imagination. There's no way that anybody can say that Trump does not do that. I think that if you look at the songs that he came in, just as he walked in, I am a real American. Fight for the rights of every man. Fight for your life. Were some of the lyrics of the song, and so he was ushered in on that song in an attempt to make his base believe that his true intent, as you mentioned, was to represent and protect and make America great again. However, when he left out, the song he played was Hold On, I'm Coming. So even in that 29 minutes, which again is something to be considered when we think about what we normally get from Trump. Trump normally goes on and on about himself, but this time he carefully and methodically took 29 minutes to try to make everybody else look bad, and not make it so much about what he did as far as taking any accountability. So I'd have to say that if we go back to what we know about Trump as it relates to even um, pre presidential run, becoming the president, and then his post candidacy, we know that his behaviors are consistent with that of a narcissist. Everything is about Trump. Trump threw Pence away at the drop of a dime, and he had been there with him, all that time. He, was willing to risk the lives of the American people as we look at the January 6th insurrection. And so there is that you don't need a behavior expert to talk about what we see. Everybody, that's anybody, can see what it is that we get from this man. And I have to second what Attorney Dobbins said, in that if Trump is to become the next president in 2024, that we all should be concerned for what that looks like for us as Americans.
Yeah, I'm going to get to, thank you for those comments. I'm going to get to Mr. Hill. He has a comment as well. Mr. Hill, can you hear me?
I can hear you guys.
Oh,
Can you?
I'm hearing a clicking noise. Is anyone else hearing that? Yeah.
yeah, I hear that as well. You can go ahead. Oh, you can go ahead and speak, Mr. Hill. I think you're on mute right now. Okay. We've lost your connection some kind of way. Mr. Hill, we can see you and you're not on mute, but we are not able to hear you for some reason right now. As soon as he's able to chime in, we'll go back to him with his comment. Um, so, in all that we've talked about, and Mr. Hill, if you chime in and we can hear you, I'll stop speaking at any point in this statement. But in all that we have talked about to this point, looking at the American political landscape as a whole, does this indictment change the way we view politics in this country? Um, he's labeled this as a witch hunt. And my concern or my question is, does this set a precedent for witch hunts across the board anytime you have a political opponent or a political enemy, in some estimations, that you can just go after them with whatever kind of ammunition you find, that even using the law as a weapon?
if I may.
Okay, Mr. Johnson. I see your hand up, Mr. Clinton, but I'm not sure if we can hear you. But Mr. Johnson, you can go ahead.
Well, I think if we look back over the recent history, um, I'll call it the rise of Donald Trump. We've been breaking norms. They've been breaking norms from the very beginning. I'm old enough to remember when there was a political candidate who was running for president, and there were pictures of him on a boat with a woman who was not his wife. And immediately upon those pictures being publicized, he himself resigned from the campaign. And he was a person that a lot of people liked when I was before I could even vote, and I remember it. Um, and like Ms. Dobbins, I have a background in political science, and I like to just say this as well. My first license was in the state of Illinois, where Ms. Dobbins went to school at DePaul. But the political landscape has been changing for many years, and I've seen several news stories going back all the way to Richard Nixon, and even as far back as President Kennedy. President Kennedy was a progressive Democrat who had Lyndon Baines Johnson on his ticket, who was a Dixiecrat, so that he could get the Southern vote as well as the Northern vote. And so it was then that some of these, I would say, the split, the fault lines began. They were small, but they've gotten larger. And what Donald Trump has done is he has created a huge chasm, the kind that would create an earthquake, which is why I believe that this is a pivotal moment, as Ms. Dobbins and Dr. Lemonier have stated, because the chasm is only getting wider. And Donald Trump is now, and I think erroneously, pitted himself as the everyday man when we know he's not. He's always come from a rich family. He's a very rich man, but somehow he's able to make people who are not as financially successful as he is to believe that he's their guy. In this particular case, he's also pitted himself as um, as Alvin Bragg as the big giant trying to crush the little man. Once again, making himself demure, even though he's not financially. And Alvin Bragg and the Democrats, he has to fight against, this corrupt scheme. So, with respect to your question in terms of whether this is going to go on, quite possibly, because if we look at what happened in Tennessee just recently, in the Tennessee legislature, there's never been any representative kicked out of the legislature for decorum. It's always been for committing some sort of crime or something much more serious than decorum, but they kicked out two representatives for decorum. So we're already seeing it. There was a conservative commentator who said, okay, they want to indict Donald Trump in New York, we'll indict Bill Clinton in Idaho. So it's these kinds of things that are happening on a local level with respect to the split that Donald Trump is just exacerbating. Um, and real quickly, the question before was, what does this mean? Or Dr. Hill, excuse me, Mr. Hill asked, why are we doing this at this particular time? And I just jotted down just a few quick things. One of them is we have to show that every one of us in this country is subject to the law, that none of us are above the law. So that's one reason to do it. Another reason to do it is because we have to protect the rule of law. If we don't believe as a country, as a people, that the rule of law matters, then we're going to devolve into chaos. We're going to devolve into the types of countries that we look down upon now. We're going to devolve into those countries where there's constant civil war and there's constant battle. And lastly, I'm just listening to Alvin Bragg, and he may have his own reasons as a DA, but he did speak to this when he was in his press conference. Manhattan is the central place of all our financial activity. Wall Street is in Manhattan. Donald Trump's corporation is a corporation in the state of New York. He has businesses and other businesses in the state of New York. We have to protect our financial center because, as we saw when the banking crisis under President Obama, how things went bad then, and even before with George Bush, and we can go all the way back to the Great Depression. Whenever things financially fall apart from the country, it hurts the smallest of us first. So we have to protect. And these type of crimes that Donald Trump has been charged with have other folks have been charged with as well. Falsification of records has been charged against other people in the state of New York. So that the crime is not something new. It's not novel. The only thing is that it's against Donald Trump, who's portraying himself as the everyman.
See if we can hear you.
Yeah, yeah, I'm here. I
All
apologize. My
right.
AirPods went dead on. I thought they were fully charged, so forgive me.
No
So
worries. No
I
worries.
agree actually that regardless of the outcome or the punishment, I mean there is value in holding Trump accountable. Everyone should be accountable, and I don't think he'll get any jail time. Uh, I don't know how strong the case is, but regardless of that, I mean, the whole purpose of this is just to demonstrate that hey, everyone is accountable, to the law. And then just my comments on Trump's character, uh, I believe, he has somewhat of a messiah complex, and the guy's an opportunist. I don't. By the way, I just want to state for the record, I know we're not here to bash Trump, but I do not support Trump in any way. I mean, imaginable. But at the same time, I don't believe that he actually fully embraces all of the stuff that he spews out. I mean, that's for his base, and he's an opportunist. And then I'm looking at this maybe from a like an macroeconomic, and then maybe even demographic, trends that are taking place. So, for example, the U.S. is not as competitive as it was before, and on the global, economy, stage. And so, like recently, you've had this look at the BRICS nations, and you hear people talking about that, and people are criticizing Joe Biden and blaming him for the rise of the BRICS, which I mean, when you look at it, in fact, I mean, it's just natural. But the BRICS nations, I mean, they represent collectively 40% of the GDP, global GDP. And so the real truth of the matter is that we don't have we don't have the ability or capacity to dominate, and drive, policy, and that is impacting our economy, and so and you've got cheaper labor. I'm going to try to bring this back though. So you got that force there, and that has impacted, the jobs and maybe the quality of life. And we have inflation, we have this rising debt, and so you got these people that are suffering. White people, and I don't want to make this a racial thing, but it is what it is. So they're feeling the pain like a lot of people have felt pain for generations. And then you take into account the demographics. I was like looking at it, so like I mean, uh, African Americans, I mean, we represent almost 14% of the eligible voters, in this country. We have a very valuable political currency that has been devalued, over the years. And you look at these figures are from Pew Research, Center. But you look at white Americans, I mean, they represent 67% of the eligible voters in America. You look at Latinos, they represent, over 13%, And so the country's changing, and they're losing that power base. And let's just face it, I mean, if you look at, the history, since we're speaking about this in a historical context, history of America. I mean, we're only a few generations removed, from slavery, or sharecropping and all of that. And so, yeah, maybe the laws have changed, on paper or whatever. But when it comes to changing someone's philosophy or values, that can take more than generations. And so you have this thing going on here. I think Trump's capitalizing on that. And so you got the old, divide and conquer, and he's playing to it, but I don't think he gives two bits about his constituency either. I don't know if that makes sense to anyone. But that's just my 2 cents. Okay.
It does make good sense, and thank you for your comment. I want to. I can't. Let me see who has their hand up next. I think Mr. Johnson and then Ms. Dobbins. I want to just insert here that um, the average person, that the average American, um, like, does this do anything for our life? Are we going to walk if he gets convicted? Will the average American's life change if he gets acquitted or these charges are dismissed? Does the average American's life change? And also, let me insert, as a business owner, um, and I'm not a Trump supporter. I do want to make that clear, but at the same time, I have to look at things through various lenses. And one of the lenses as a business owner is that there are some, when I looked at a NATO meeting and I looked at the way past presidents have spoken to NATO in a very diplomatic way, and then I look at President, the former President Trump going into an international meeting and dogmatically saying that the US has been paying too much for too long and it's time that we stop. That is not the diplomatic thing to say, but it resonates with a lot of business owners. When I look at taxes on capital gains, and I look at some of the laws, the tax laws that are available um, to business owners, which is why when his tax information was released, we could see that he didn't pay very much in taxes. But he did so because there were tax laws there that his tax accountants and uh, those financial people in his corner were able to use, and there's been no finding that it was illegal at this point. So I'm just saying, I've spoken with a lot of people who are Republicans. I've spoken with a lot of people who support Trump, and most of them that I've spoken to are business owners and see that some of his stances for the U.S. and the economy of the U.S. are favorable for business owners. That's kind of the devil's advocate line that I want to insert here as we continue with the discussion. I think Mr. Johnson was up next.
Very, very quickly. I think to answer your question directly, it depends on what your personal financial status is. If you are a lower level employee and a worker, you have a job, you go to work, you don't pay employees, you go to work and you are a blue collar worker, you are in the retail business, you're a greeter at Walmart. I think that there could be some effect, but I think overall there's no effect because whatever happens on that level, whether he's convicted or not, is not going to change even my day to day activities. Um, but once again, if you're a business owner, you're also looking at it from a fiscal matter. You want to keep costs down so that you can make more money. And so, from that standpoint, I agree with you, Lavelle, that a president can affect that much more. But it also takes Congress and it also takes the judiciary as well because they write the laws and they write the laws in favor of one or the other. But that also causes some other rifts between the haves and the have-nots. So it's a very complicated issue. But just to get it directly, if you are a lower level employee and you have a job, it's not going to necessarily affect you. The higher you are in your profession and the more, or you're a business owner, then yeah, it'll definitely affect you. Right now, I'm in the city of Austin and the tech industry is laying off. They're laying off thousands of people right now as we go forward because they employed a lot of people over the last several years during the tech boom. And now the industry is right sizing itself, as a lot of experts are saying. They're right sizing themselves. They're cutting off. But the bigger part is corporations want to pay more to their shareholders. So the quickest way to get to that is to lay off employees, is to get rid of employees. So the dichotomy between the haves and the have-nots is what Donald Trump is exploiting, as we've already said. But I do believe that it depends on where you are financially, on whether it affects you or not. And to go just briefly to what Mr. Hill was talking about, I believe that this is important. This moment is important in history, but because we're so focused in on what's going on in our country, we're ignoring what's happening in the bigger global context. Because it's not just BRICS and what they're doing, but they're also making inroads in Africa, where many of the elements that we use in our daily lives come from. And if you listen, there are many countries in Nigeria, in Africa, who are saying we're going to devalue the dollar, we're going to use the yen. They're aligning themselves more with the BRICS, and I think that's a bigger thing than even what's going on in our country. But this is dominating the headlines instead of that. So I agree with Dr. Hill, with Mr. Hill. There are bigger things that are going on, that when the left hand is doing one thing, the right hand is doing something else. And the right hand in this case is the global economy is being affected. Saudi Arabia is lowering production, and they're also aligning themselves with the BRICS. So China and Russia have aligned themselves because that's the establishment of the BRICS. So once again, we're losing our country, the United States is losing ground, whereas the BRICS are gathering ground, particularly with the African continent.
Ms. Dobbins, I think you were next, and then Mr. Clinton. Mr. Hill, I see Jay Clinton on there.
Um, yeah, so to kind of come full circle, there, I start with a saying that I've heard a lot of times, and that is that you create a vibe and then the bag will come. And I'll explain what I mean by that and what I think we're missing when it comes to Donald Trump. Um, when Donald Trump ran for office in 2016 and he prevailed, one of the biggest things that I heard from people was that, well, they identified pretty much how we started here. They identified with some of the business aspects that he had, and we weren't happy with either candidate. What's the worst he could do? It's not going to be that bad. And so I think we need to keep that in mind and kind of learn from the past couple of years in that respect. There's a lot of damage he can do. So for me, when we're looking at this case and, what is the trajectory and what is the outcome if he is found guilty, I think there's huge ones. We're talking about a person who does have sort of a narcissist, and I'll say sort of because I'm not clinical. I do think he is a narcissist, but I'm not qualified necessarily to say that. But we're talking about a person who has narcissistic tendencies that's emboldened by social media and has been able to mobilize people to do things based on false information and so that playbook, I will call it, that won him the election in 2016 is relatively new. It upset a lot of ways that when I was in college and I studied political science, it went completely against everything that you know. Polls weren't accurate. The popular vote didn't matter. And so if you really pay attention, since that happened, every single Republican candidate has been following that playbook. And they've been using it, depending on where you live, to put legislation and things in place that are completely, in my personal opinion, asinine. I mean, Florida is a great example, where they're recently passing things like the gun laws and the education related things that are directly targeted at a base that is inflamed and slightly racist. And so when we're talking about what the damage is going to be, if or what you're going to feel as a normal everyday individual, I think it goes well beyond finances. We're talking about rights to vote. We're talking about dialing back, reintroducing gerrymandering. reintroducing having to guess how many marbles are in a jar to vote. I mean, very, very dangerous things that are not a joke and that there's proven evidence of if you're paying attention. And so if he's found guilty, I think it's going to send a message to certain candidates that this isn't necessarily the playbook that's going to work anymore. And I really do overall think that is the goal. If he's found innocent, I think we have a lot of work to do because it's going to further embolden a group of people who are already doing things that have an adverse effect on minorities and people who are in a lower financial bracket. And they're just going to continue to move as normal. And then, with that in mind, he'll go on to run for president. He may have a likelihood of prevailing because he's proven that he's done a very good job of the bait and switch. If there, he's going to take this case, if it's not in trial at the time, to say that the Democrats did it, which is what he did in his press conference, and that we were targeting him because we didn't want him to turn the world back into the good old days, where or whatever he calls it. And that has already proven to be incredibly dangerous. So I think and then we're going to have to talk about constitutional amendments, in my opinion. We come back to the conversation of the electoral college. Is he going to win the popular vote this time, or are we going to be dealing with the same thing we dealt with in 2016? So I think this is very pivotal at this point. I think how it's going to impact politics down the road is yet to be seen. I think this is our Watergate. It's not something we're going to be able to necessarily foresee the overall consequences. I think I can see the strategy, and that is to cripple his base, cripple the illogical idealization that people have of him, and to try to, in some sense, return some of the politics. And I know people don't like it, but to politics as usual. And I'll say this because I've always wanted to say it in a public forum. Politics is one of the only areas where we don't accept career people and experience as valid. It's like if you went to the doctor and you needed surgery, you wouldn't say, "Oh, I don't want doctors as usual. I want the business person who lies and commits fraud to perform my surgery." But when it comes to politics and the perception of our country across the world, we're perfectly okay doing that. Screw your education. Screw how many years you've been in different roles within the country. Screw your background or the inside knowledge that you might have. Let's go with the complete outsider and put all of our faith in him and then act surprised when he fails miserably at doing the job. And I think we need to get over that and get out of that and start letting people who have been in politics, who understand the consequences of certain things, and just start really kind of getting involved. Like there was a comment earlier about slavery wasn't that long ago. Our engagement is low because of where our background is. Learn the game and start holding politicians accountable. You don't have to accept everything that's put in front of you. You don't have to align with things that are not in your nature, but you do have to participate, or we're going to have a similar situation that we had in 2016, in my opinion.
All right. Well, thank you for that. Those statements. Mr. Hill, you're next, and then Dr. Lemonier, you will have the floor after that. And we actually have gotten to the limit where I wanted to stop. I'm going to go ahead and let these comments come in, and then we will discuss moving forward after that. Mr. Hill and then Dr. Lemonier.
Okay, I'll try to keep it brief. First of all, I want to say, Esquire Dobbins, those were very salient points you made. I'm completely in agreement with alignment. Very well said. Uh, I remember when Donald Trump got elected, and you're right, there weren't, maybe it was everyone mentioned, there were no good choices, in that 2016, election. And so he won, and I kind of my attitude was like what it is right now. It really hurt me to say that. So then I said, okay, let's give the guy a chance. I said he's gonna break a few pieces of furniture while he's in there. I said, but he may do some good, and that is actually what happened in some instances. I mean, he did have the guts to stand up to NATO and say, hey,
this needs to change, and he was very pro business. Uh, so there were some good things that he did, but obviously there were a lot of things I don't even need to go into. And then it reminds me of I think Dave Chappelle like once when he said when Trump got elected, he made a joke or comment that he's not working for you, he's working for me, because yeah, he's wealthy, he's in that upper 5-1% whatever. Uh, but aside from that, we have the economic business cycle. People sometimes they lose sight of that or just may not be aware of it. And so you get these four phases in the economy, either domestically or even globally. Where you have your your expansion period, you have your peak, you have your contraction, and then you have your trough. And I often argue with people sometimes, try to debate at least, that it really doesn't matter like who's in office. It just depends upon where you're at in that economic business cycle, the phase. And so you get politicians, whether it's Trump or Clinton, like Clinton said once, it's the economy's stupid, and that's what he got admit. So people, I mean, Americans, we have a tendency when times are good, I mean, we will look at the moral character and other things that affect our quality of life. But when you get a bad economy or people hurt, like you mentioned, these layoffs that are occurring, they don't care, who's running for office or who's in office. Like you say, you give a drowning man a harpoon, he'll reach out and grab it, right? And Trump takes advantage of that. I think for us, so wrap it up going forward. Like I threw out some of these numbers in terms of percentages of the eligible vote. Voters that are out there. So, like I said, you have like 67% of whites are eligible voters. And we know that not all 67% of those stand with Donald Trump. So they really do have I mean, they are a minority, and so they have to keep moving the goalposts and bring back gerrymandering and some of these things, whatever they can, to give themselves an upper leg. But I think it's really going to be important for us as African Americans going forward because we do have a valuable political currency with the percentage of the vote. And we look at these other groups, I think we really need to consider building some political alliances, to look after our own interests. And we're not going to win every concession that we want. We're not going to win everything we want at every election. But as long as we can make progress, and we have to use our political currency to do that. I mean, there was a time, last point, in this country, like back in maybe the 1920s or 30s, we had a massive influx of immigrants. And if you weren't, white Protestant, whatever, you were looked down upon if you were Irish, if you were Italian, whatever. But eventually these people came together and they built these alliances. And now you don't hear anyone referring to themselves as I'm an Italian American or Irish American. They just say I'm American, but they're white, whatever, right? I think we need to maybe widen our tent, because we do have some common goals and interests uh, that we share that maybe other people who are possibly in the MAGA camp or have different set of values don't share, and maybe they don't have our best interests. I'm going to stop there. That's all I got to say.
Thank you, Mr. Hill. Dr. Lemonier.
When we speak about the impact on the everyday American, I think it's critical that we not only look at the business lens, but that we consider the from a social science lens. And I think that Attorney Dobbins did a really good job at bringing that into perspective for us. I want to say that we would assume that Trump's base would have learned something from his response to the penalties that many of them are receiving as it relates to the insurrection. He rallied his troops. They showed up. They got in trouble. He left them out there. But they have not, based on what I can see. The news medias are reporting that Trump has raised some $8 million for his defense, his legal defense, and his he has grown by 20% ahead of DeSantis and Biden in most polls. And so we know that nothing was learned from that. But when we think about the everyday person, we cannot leave this discussion without remembering that just right here in Texas, people who were empowered or emboldened, as Attorney Dobbins references it, by Trump, were running people off the road, running candidates off the road. We found people hanging from trees, and we're still waiting to determine in Houston as to what happened to individuals that were just out of the blue found hanging from a tree. He has empowered the Ku Klux Klan to take their hoods off. And I think that it is critical that we don't lose sight of the fact that some of the statements that he makes are just as dangerous as they were when he was president. And whether he wins or lose, that is something that we have to be concerned with every day. I know that African Americans, as African Americans, mostly men, you guys, every day that you step out of your homes, that you are concerned about whether or not you're going to return to your families. And so those are things that we can attribute to Trump as a president as well as Trump as a person.
All right, I think we have one more hand up. It's Attorney Johnson.
I had my hand up, but I wanted to get where you were going. You said you wanted to see if we were going to go forward because you initially had talked about doing things for about an hour. So go ahead. My comment can wait until after that.
Okay. Well, I do want to say thank you. You guys have been very insightful. I think that our audience is going to appreciate the remarks and comments and the amount of intellect that has been shown on this panel. So thank you for participating. I came into this understanding that there's a lot to talk about. um, there's a lot more to cover. We haven't even really touched on the social versus economic aspect that goes along with this whole idea of a former president being indicted. So those are things that I still think that we need to cover. You guys um, have done a great job of laying a foundation. I think that perhaps if you are available and we can talk offline, I'd love to have a part two of this. And perhaps when this post this goes out and our viewers begin to see it and we can see comments back from the viewers, I'd like to get some comments and questions from viewers and listeners and incorporate that perhaps into a part two. So we will definitely speak offline about that. Um, I think that everyone has had an opportunity basically to give that we were going to give 2 minutes for parting comments. I think that has been used fairly well. I just want to say to the Dadcast Nation, thank you for tuning in to this episode. And I hope that you share this episode and use it as a discussion piece in your own circles. I think that we need to have good conversation, regardless of if we agree or not on certain issues. The conversation needs to go on in our own circles, and we need to use that persuasion within our circles to move us toward participation in the process. We can sit here all day and we can say it doesn't matter. I'm not affected, but somebody you know is affected, or somebody that you know that knows someone is affected. There's a downline of impact that goes along with what is happening in our political system, what is happening in our social system, and what is happening with the landscape of America. And so I think that we have to influence our own circle and we have to reach out to others and we have to move the line forward. We can't let those that seek to destroy democracy or to taint democracy to get to the goal line before we do. So I think we have to, I think Mr. Hill mentioned it, we have to have alliances with those that have similar interests, and we're not going to all agree. But if we have a central theme that we can agree on, I think we can move the pendulum forward. I'm saying that to say that local elections count. To those that are listening and watching, you have to get involved. We have to be involved in local politics. That sheriff that just got elected in your area, in your county, matters to you. that judge that's sitting, that justice of the peace that's making a determination on truancy cases, they matter to you. That judge that's on a state level but is in your district matters to you because they are directly impacting our daily lives. And I want to encourage us, I want to admonish us to get involved, to seek, go to meetings, go to a city council meeting, go to a school board meeting, get involved in the things that matter at your level. And that's gonna prompt us to make a wider impact across the country. And so I could probably talk all day about this. I'm passionate about it. I think that the system is not equitable. I'm not talking about equality, but the system is not equitable, and we need equity. And so perhaps you'll see us back again soon, hopefully, as a panel to come in with a part two of this. Again, go to our YouTube page, the Dadcast Podcast. Subscribe to the YouTube page so that you can get the videos. They're not all political and they're not all serious. I have a lot of crazy things that we do on the podcast. But please make sure that you share, like, and comment. Keep the discussion moving forward. You can find us on iHeartRadio, Pandora, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere where these podcasts are streaming. You can listen to us if you're riding in your car, and then go to the YouTube page and leave a comment. Until next time, I want to thank again our panel members, Attorney Lethell Johnson, Attorney Brittany Dobbins, investment guru, Mr. J. Clinton Hill, and behavioral specialist and my boo, Dr. Lemonier. She's shaking her head at me. Hey, thanks again, Dadcast Nation. Look forward to seeing you on the next episode. As I always say, peace. I'm out.
Peace.